Let's get organized. What's up? I'm Jonathan and welcome to Maker Tales, where I'm sharing my maker journey to help you go further in yours. So don't forget to subscribe and hit that little bell icon to never miss an opportunity to keep making. This video is a little longer than most because, well, precision organization is needed for precision modeling, and I wanted to show you everything that we have available here within Blender to organize things quickly and efficiently. Now that we're starting to get a grips with Blender's precision modeling, there's something I've neglected, which is organization. Organization is key, especially within precision modeling. So right this minute, my object here is saying that it's a cube. It obviously isn't, it's my example object. So let's rename it so. So double click, or I click and F2, and this here lets me name this example object. So this here renames it within something called the hierarchy. This is our hierarchy, which has collections in it and scenes. Don't worry about that too much. Just make sure that in this drop down, you are in the live layer, the view layer. And the view layer has your collections. You might have a camera and a light in here, depending if you've deleted it or not. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about these collections, what exactly these are. So right this minute, we have a collection, and you might have things outside of the collection. You might have things within the collection. It all depends how things have been created while you've been modeling within Blender. So to have a little bit more to play with, I'm going to duplicate this example. To duplicate, it is Shift-D, and I'm duplicating in the x-axis, so I've constrained it to the x and dragged it out. We will be going over duplication in the future, but just for now we have just two examples to work with collections. So we have these two objects within one collection. What does this mean? This means that if I turn off the collection, it turns off the visibility of my objects. Something else I want to show you just while we're tackling collections is this little funnel. This is a filter, or the restriction toggles. There's two very important ones here, which is this one here, which is selectability, and then there's this one here, which is viewability or viewport display. It's important because there's another one called render display, which we'll cover once we get into rendering. But let's go into the viewport and selectability. Now, the reason why this is important is within collection, now you can affect everything within a collection all together in one click. So you can turn off the visibility, like we've just shown, the viewport visibility, which will come into effect later on, and the selectability. So if I turn this off, I can no longer select objects. This is great if you're working with many objects that are on top of each other. For instance, you're sorting out a build of a house or a workshop or a tiny house or anything like that. This here lets you control that. So let's say we're wanting two more of these. So let's duplicate these out on the Y. And now we have all these items, too many items. I want another collection. So to go ahead and do this, on the right hand side, there is new collection. Let's pop this in, and we have a new collection right there. So I want my top two here to be within my second collection. To put those in, I just drag and drop them in. You can see here, Control to link and Shift to parent, just drop them in there, and those are now in my second collection. Something that's a little bit interesting is that you can have a collection within a collection. So keep that in mind, but for now, we're not going to go into embedded collections. We're just going to work with two collections. So this means, so we have our collection 1, which is this one here, and our collection 2, which is these two here. Now, this might not be very useful right this minute. You might be used to groupings, especially with Illustrator and Rhino and things like that. So you're expecting that if that was in a collection and you click a collection, that should now move everything in that collection. Well, it doesn't work like that within Blender. To do that, you need to do the Shift-G, which is select by a grouping of type. So if I select this and I want to select everything within its collection, I go Shift G, and what I'm wanting to do is select grouped by collection. This will select everything within that collection. So once again, go ahead yourself and select group this one down here. Just selecting one, Shift G, and selecting by collection. This here is the closest thing to layer groups, I would guess you could call this. It's a different way of thinking of groups. A group can really much be a group of items that are not related to each other, unlike a grouping within Illustrator or within Inkscape or within Rhino or within CAD, other CAD-based softwares, where a grouping, they all group together and they're all influenced by the same transforms and positionings. Now there is something like that within organic modeling, which is something called parenting, which we will cover in this video. But before we cover parenting, I want to cover joining. So I'm just going to delete our second collection here, because there's an interesting thing I want to show you. If you just delete a collection, all that does is deletes the folder of the collection, not the items within it. Just be aware of that, because it can be a saving sake, really, that if you accidentally delete a collection folder, it doesn't delete the objects within it. You have to select everything within the collection and then delete it to then be able to delete everything within a collection. So now let's move on to joining. So when it comes to joining is the idea of making two objects one object, or separating of objects or joining of objects. So for instance, right this minute we have example and example 1. And if you go ahead and select them both and go into edit mode, you can have them both within edit mode and do changes to them. However, technically speaking, these two, if you try to join these up right this minute, won't interact with each other. This is because there are two separate objects. This is also the reason why my tool shelf is hidden right this minute. You could open it with that little arrow or with N. This is also why PDT wouldn't work doing its, for instance, finding the center point between these 2 points, because they're not the same object. So to make them the same object, we need to go into object mode and select these two. And now here you have the join command, or Control J or Command J, depending what you're using. So let's join these two together. And you can see now here, even the drop down, there is nothing connected to it. This is now one object. Our example object is now one object, which is these two surfaces. So now if we went about, we could go about and join these up together. We could go about and find the, not the intersect, sorry, the middle point between these 2 points. This is very powerful. Now, one thing is, how do you separate these now? So there is a shortcut. It's called the separation, but what I like to think of it is parting. We're parting objects apart. And to part things, you use the shortcut P. So here you can part by selection, by material, which I think we'll cover in this, and by loose parts. I'm going to go by loose parts just for simplicity right now. And that there, this is now back to example and example 1. So just once again to show, this is select one, select the other, join them up together. This now acts like a group within Illustrator or CAD or something like that. And now we're going to go and ungroup them. You can't just go part within object mode. You actually have to go into edit mode, then part. Let's go by selected this time, just to show you a different method wise. Parting by selection, and here you have it, example and example 1. So that there is the joining organization. Next up is parenting. Now parenting is something that is very much an organic modeling way of thinking. This is mainly comes from joints, so it might be a little bit alien if you haven't worked with a hierarchy system before in the sense of parenting. So let's go parenting the simplest method possible. So we're wanting to parent example1 to example. To parent these, you can do it within the hierarchy by dragging over example1, and you can see there it says control to link or shift to parent. So hold down shift. This is now dropped to set parent. What that has done, if we drop down this hierarchy arrow here, it is now a child, of the parent of example. Now, what exactly does this mean? This means that if I select example, it doesn't mean that it selects everything in it, but it influences everything that's a child of it. So now if I go about and move example, it will move the child, which is example1. Now, if I select example1 and move example1, it will not move the parent. This can be good and bad depending how you see it, but just be aware of this functionality. I usually don't really parent objects to other objects because of this exact thing, because it can be a little bit tedious all of a sudden being like, oh, but I wanted that to move later on in the future. So the way that this is worked around, let's unparent these. To unparent them, we're going to select the child, going to do Alt-P, or if you want to see all of these shortcuts, it's under Objects, Parent. Right here you can see Control-P to parent, Alt-P to clear a parent. So select the child, Alt-P, clear parent, and that there is the parent cleared. Now, the best way to go about this, in my opinion, is to create something called an empty. So Shift-A, we're creating an empty. We're going to create some arrows that will be created on our little 3D cursor there. So here we have this new thing called an empty. Now, the empty is outside the collection. Let's just drag it into the collection. Doesn't matter if it's in or out. And now we have our examples and our empty. Now, just to help recognize what I'm going to be using the empty for, I'm going to rename it. Do you remember the renaming shortcut? Go and do that. Rename it. And I'm going to call this the controller. So with our now empty, which is our controller, we're going to parent it to our objects. The selection is the children and the parent last. Children, parent last. And I'm going to do Control P, object. And you can see right this minute in our hierarchy, our example objects have disappeared. They haven't disappeared. They're now children of the controller. This is great, for instance, if you're doing a build, for instance, a puzzle box or a house or something along those lines, and you want to move everything together. You now have a controlling thing that will control everything together. So this lets you move all the objects, but it also lets you move each object separately as well. Okay, so now we have parenting, joining, and collections. This can still not be really organized, so to speak. So let's go ahead and let's duplicate our parent. Sorry, not our parent. We're wanting to duplicate our surfaces here. And let's move them up over there. And you can see that these, because they were duplicated and they're still joint, they're all still children of this. So just for our next example, I'm going to actually clear all our parenting. Go ahead and give that a go. That's selecting everything, going Alt-P and clear parent. I'm going to remove this controller because we're not going to need it for this example. But what I'm wanting to do is create an example a little bit like this. So let's say all these were some sort of layered mechanism on top of each other. And it's starting to get a little bit hard to see, especially if things were exactly on top of each other. So how do we go about clearing this? So to clear this and to make it more visible, I want to show you a couple of things. Up on the top right hand side, we've played around with the X-ray toggle, which lets you see through everything, but that doesn't help in the slightest. So we have something called the wireframe mode. So wireframe will just show you all the edges. Again, doesn't really help out. And then we have our solid mode, which is this one here. We're not going to cover these here just yet, the material and rendering, but just know that within the wire and the solid, we can get quite a bit done. So just very quickly, if we go into wiring and you go into this little drop down, you can color things randomly. And here they are colored randomly. You can also color them by different things, but right this minute, what we're wanting in the Blender community is to be able to control this. Right this minute, it's not possible just yet, but what is possible is controlling the coloring in the solid mode. So if we go into the solid viewport up here, and I want to introduce to you something called materials. So down here, this little beach ball thing is our materials property panel. So within our materials property, I'm going to go to example 1, our normal example, and we're going to create a material by hitting new. This created a material. Now I'm going to call this E1 just to keep this nice and simple, and ignore all the other material properties right this minute, because all we're wanting is our viewport display properties. These viewport display properties will change how this object looks like within the solid viewport itself. So let's set this to a nice green. Already you can see how this is going to become very powerful. So let's go ahead and change the color of this example 3 here. Go ahead, try and do this, and I'll show you right this minute how I go about doing it. So I'm going to create a new material. I'm going to call this E2. We're going to change the color to a nice pinky magenta, and here we have it. So now we have these colors here. Now, going about and creating a new material for every object is going to be quite tedious. So to make this a little bit easier, let's just say these two objects here are actually supposed to be green, those two. So let's select what we're wanting to change. So let's change the magenta, and we're wanting to change it to the green. And now the shortcut here is Control L for linking. So make a link between materials. So this here has now changed the material by a link. So what it's done is taken a look at what exactly is that material and changed it. So now if we go ahead and let's change this on this little drop down here, and change this to material 2. And we're going to go and link this to that green one over there. So give that a go. That's by, this one's already selected, so now you can shift select this one, go Control L to link by material. So let's go and create 4 individual materials now. So we're going to go here. So we already have a material set. So how do I add a material to this? So on the top right here, there's a little plus button to add a material. And that's added. We're adding a new material into here. So let's go ahead and rename this one. Let's call this E3. Oh, but wait, there's already a material set on this material. So how do I go about removing it? Select the material you do not want and hit the minus button. So now we're going to set this one to a nice, let's go orange, and this one here, a new material. Set this one E4, and let's give that blue. So there you have it. Now we have all our objects set to different materials that really makes our life so much easier when it goes about editing and organizing our workflow. Now all of these can still be parented to one another, and they won't affect their materials and so on and so forth. And like I mentioned in the joining part, now that we have different materials set, you can actually join these together. So these can be now edited together. In fact, let's join it all together. So all of these are joined together now. Ooh, Shift G, I meant to do Control G. So these are all within one object. We have all these, we can go into edit, but now we can part things by material. And this now parts everything beautifully by the material properties that we set before. And there you have it. That is every way that I know of organizing things within Blender in the quickest and most efficient ways possible. If you're wanting a bit of a challenge, I do have a Blender file down in the description of a puzzle box that I've made that I would encourage you to download, test out your grouping, coloring, parenting skills on that, really go to town with it and see what you've learned from this video. A huge thank you to my patrons. You guys are freaking awesome. And if you're enjoying this series, I would love it if you would consider supporting me there too. Thank you for watching, keep making, and let the quest continue.